Having said all that, let's taste away, smell the wine. And for me, I'm drinking the same sample bottles you guys are. If just to make sure I had the exact same wine glass, and I think the samples were fantastic, are holding up great. But for me, on this, I'm getting a real nice, still getting lemon, like a verbena, lemongrass characteristic to it. Still coming through a little bit more of a, as it ages, some of that kind of toasted almond notes, a little nuttiness is coming through on it. And then for me, always pear. I always get pear in my Chardonnay, a lot of pear notes. But you can see the oak. I mean, I don't really pick up much of the oak component at all in this wine. And if you taste a newer vintage, you can really see the difference of how the oak, it's a good way to learn and see how the oak dissipates over time.
Michael, when you were saying you do it in 50% new French oak, do you literally put 50% of the wine in new oak barrels and 50% in other? And when do you do the mixing?
Good question. No, so I'll have, say, anywhere from 10 to 20 barrels per vintage, depends on the quantity I'm making. And say if it's 10 barrels, 5 of them will be brand new barrels. The other 5 will be 1, 2, and 3-year-old barrels, use 1, 2, second use, third use, fourth use barrels. So I'll do a mix of the other barrels. And then I usually, it depends on the vintage. Most of the times I take them out of barrel, and I taste through all the barrels and decide if there's any rejects I don't like, doesn't work. And then in the summertime, either there's 2 options. Either I bottle in August before the next harvest, or I let them go through the fall and bottle them late fall, early winter. So it depends. That's where it is a decision about how the wine's aging, when to finish fermenting. This wine was bottled in August of 14. The last 2 or 3 vintages I've bottled in December of that year. So it's aged a little bit longer, over a year in barrel. So it really depends on the vintage and how it's showing in the barrel. There's no set rule as to when it is bottled, but it's not what we call, the term is called racking. It's not racked off the sediment in the barrel until that year later when it goes to bottling. So after the fermentation is over, all the dead yeast cells fall to the bottom, and you have a sludge kind of consisting called lees at the bottom of the barrel. And what we do throughout the whole process of fermentation and through the aging process is we stir the barrels once a week to get that sediment off the bottom of the barrel and have it integrate back into the wine. And that's a stylistic technique that we do in Burgundy as well. That's where it originated, called batonage, where we stir like a baton. We stir the barrels, and that dead yeast goes back through and adds that kind of toasty, nutty, bread-like component back into the wine. And that's an aging technique and style that I do for the whole year that it's aging, to give it a little bit more broader, richer palate.
Every week. Wow.
So hopefully you guys, when you taste this wine, for me, I mean, the acidity is fantastic for, an 8-year-old bottle of Virginia Chardonnay. It still has great acidity. This is still young for me. For this Chardonnay, I think this Chardonnay has another 3 years to go, maybe even more. I wouldn't mind holding this for another 3 years.
We're on mute, right?
And I think if you pick up on the palate, the creaminess that it matches up to the acidity. I get, the finish is nice and long, but it has that crispness in the back of the palate, which is really important for balance. I hope you can pick up some of that. Yeah, what I was talking about the lees, the toastiness still on the palate, yeasty component, almost like a champagne in terms of the characteristics on the palate, in terms of the nuttiness and the toastiness from the lees.
I chuckled when you mentioned the butterscotch, because I could
Pick it up.
taste a little butterscotch right on the end, on the finish of it. It's pretty good. It's really good.
Great. Yeah, no, it really, as the oak impact, as it ages, it goes from that intense toast and vanilla to more caramel, butterscotch characteristics as the wine ages. Any other comments on it? So for me, this is, you know, a great cheese wine you could have with more, maybe, you know, a little more hard cheeses like Comte, Gruyere, cheese with a little texture, grittiness to it, Gouda maybe, and then for pairing, I'm excited because I already know what I'm having for dinner tonight. I'm going to open the bottle, and I'm having a chicken breast stuffed with goat cheese and spinach. And that is, for me, going to be a great pairing with this dish. And I think that's the kind of something, a little creaminess, richness, but not too heavy sauce. It can handle some, you know, a lemony, buttery sauce, but I don't think that's ideal. Maybe something a little more creamier is what I would recommend. You know, seafood with a little more of a, you know, you can have a lemon butter, but maybe a little bit richer than that. Something a little bit rich, not too acidic. Any comments or questions on the Chardonnay?
Michael, when you submit wines for the Governor's Cup, do you have, is it your choice what vintage year you put in, or does the competition say it has to be in this year?
So basically, the rules are they say you can go back to a certain, just to minimize too many wines and people holding back too much wine for the competition only, not having enough inventory. I think this year, the furthest back you can go was 2015, maybe?
Yeah, I think it's 5 years.
5 years?
Yeah. Also,
So
because a lot of the time the older wines they might rank higher. So
Yeah.
if everyone's putting in 2012 or 2013, then they might get all the gold.
There's a few wineries like me and Barboursville and some of those that hold back wines for their library to make available. And you need to have 50 cases available to be in the Governor's Cup of any one wine. So it's you know, it's expensive for wineries to hold back 50 cases. You know, if they made 200, that's a big percentage of the production to hold back and wait just for a Governor's Cup. So most people wouldn't do it, but I think just because they need to minimize the number, they already have 550 wines entered. That's a lot for them to taste. If they let more people enter older vintages, it would probably go up by, you know, at least 50 to 100 more entries. So I think they need to do that. Other questions?
So Michael, we decided we would do the 13 and then also the 16 as well, just to try to see the difference. And of course, you're absolutely right where the 16 has more of the butterscotch and the vanilla more up front, where you can tell it's been absorbed or integrated into the wine at this point for the 13.
Yeah, no, the 16 is the current release, and it's right now it's heavier. It's got more of the oak, still has the oak impact, but for me, the 16 right now is phenomenal. I think 16 is right up there with one of my favorite vintage. I think the 16 is going to be, you know, another 5 years is going to be incredible. For me, the 16 is right up there with the 2010, and then 2008 is one of my favorite vintages. This is right up there too. The way this is showing now, I mean, this is, you know, really impressive for me. Going back to all the vintages I've made, this is kind of, you know, I haven't given this much attention. I haven't tasted the 13 in probably a couple of years, and I'm ecstatic. And I think this is right up there. But the 16 is pretty special, the current vintage that we're selling.
Question two. The wineries across Virginia generally have the same good year.
There's an echo. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Say it again. Oh, Ivy.
As long as not too many people have their microphone on. I think that's the problem.
Can we get the question again?
Yeah, do the vintages across Virginia generally, are the years pretty good for the same kinds of grapes across Virginia, or is it really vineyard dependent?
It's vineyard and more location and the variety. So, you know, the growing region in Virginia is pretty, from all the way from the Southwest to the Eastern Shore, it's a huge region and climate's very different. So storms, really depends on one thunderstorm that comes from, one person gets right before harvest can, really change the quality of one variety where, a vineyard down the road didn't get that thunderstorm and, the grapes are in much better shape. So you can generalize, of course, because, if we get a hurricane and it covers the whole state and, everyone gets rain, then it's pretty obvious that everyone's in the same, has the same condition. But on a lot of years and a lot of, more normals, it really is a lot of variability between each vineyard site and then each variety. So there can't really, if someone says, oh, it was a terrible vintage, a lot of times you could find some really great wines that someone might have because they didn't get, all the rain, or their grapes ripened at a different time before the rains came or after. Any other questions on the Chardonnay, or should we move on to the PV?
There is a question in the comments if the 2013 Chardonnay is available to purchase still. And I do believe we have some. Are we going to sell it, Michael, individually maybe to some people?
Only the folks who are here today. So we have your names, we know who you are. And you guys, if you want to get a few more bottles, you can. We're not going to release cases of it, but we still have bottles to sell for sure. And that will be kind of, we'll see what the interest is and kind of, I have no problem if someone wants to get 3 bottles. We won't be selling this by the case. That's not going to happen, but 3 bottles or so, I think would be the limit. Okay.
That sounds great. One more question. I was fascinated with your discussion of the difference between the yeasts, the commercial yeast versus the natural yeast. And you described what happens with the natural yeast and why you use that. Can you talk a little bit about the difference in what happens with a commercial yeast? Would the wine just at this point have burned out, or would it have a different nuance, a different flavor that maybe it's not something you want, but personally, but which would have just a different flavor?
So the first part, well, one part of your question was whether it would burn out or the wine fade. And that isn't going to be really so much related to the yeast strain. That's really more about the chemistry. I mean, the yeast strain does affect how the final chemistry is after fermentation. Some, metabolize differently, but it's not a major factor in the longevity of the wine. So what happens, these commercial yeast strains are strains that they capture in different parts of the world, whether it's Burgundy or Champagne or, anywhere in California, and they reproduce those yeast strains in dehydrated form, and they have to be, they come in bags and they have to be hydrated and then add to the juice. And the objective, most wineries use commercial yeast strains because they know that the profile is almost, it's when you buy the yeast catalog, they tells you the aromatic, the flavor profiles, because it's been used so often and it has a very consistent style. Now that doesn't mean with that vineyard or your grapes, it's going to be exactly like everyone else's. It all depends on the quality of the grape. So there is variability. It's not like a textbook where it's exactly as it's written how your wine's going to taste. No, but it adds different types of nuances. But not only that, they all have been tried. They know how they ferment, whether they need more nitrogen during the fermentation, different nutrients or less, or whether they metabolize the different acids differently. So there's a lot of research and knowledge. So if people really want to fine tune the style of Chardonnay they want to make, they would look at the yeast catalog and say, oh, I love this style of Chardonnay. The flavors with my vineyard work really well, and that's what we're going to use. And so and also the bigger wineries, a lot of the big wineries, say California or wherever, it's a big mass-produced product, and they need to have consistency. So with what I'm doing, it varies from year to year, and there's too much risk involved. So it's more for commercial wines that they need these strains.